staring like a fucking mook into
not realizing
dead air.
Yeah, I hate that. Hate that.
And almost all of the music I have is copyright protected.
Yeah.
I'm basically going to assume we're live now. So,
Okay.
welcome to Slow News Day Live. It's Sunday. It's pouring fucking rain. My name is Steve Poikin, and I am here in beautiful Boulder Creek, California, and I am very pleased to welcome back to the show appearance number 5. She is now tied Ron Placone for most frequent appearances on Slow News Day. The fabulous Elizabeth Voss. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Thank you for having me again.
It's good to see you again. I know it's been a hectic month for you. It's been a crazy fucking month for me. I think we're having like similar family issues. I have a half-dead grandmother staying at my house right now. That was entirely unexpected. But what are you gonna do?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a weird week, man. It has. My boss got sick. I basically had to work by myself in the mud all fucking week, where the temperature never got over 50, which is cold when you've been California soft for like 15 years. I understand that in the Midwest, 50 is shorts and t-shirts weather, but fuck those guys.
Yeah, no, it's been a crazy month or two for me. Yeah, my family illness, the range of crazy stuff. It definitely seems to have been something a lot of people I know have been going through in the last couple of months. So yeah, totally understand.
I think that people get this kind of like waves of trauma, and our existence, as nihilistic as this may sound, but our existence is based on how we navigate and surf those waves of trauma, or if we let them sweep us away. We were talking a little bit about Julian Assange before we went live, and the testimony to human strength that she is. And yeah, she's incredible. Absolutely incredible. I should probably pull that article up, the article that she wrote. Did you get a chance to read that?
I did get a chance to read that. It was really moving, and I was happy that a mainstream outlet was willing to publish it without adding a whole bunch of crap about, like just basically fake news about Assange, because that's what they tend to do a lot of the time. Is you see these mainstream or legacy press outlets publishing something about Assange's case, and it has some true information maybe about the latest events, but then it goes into Assange, was a rapist hiding in the embassy, just a whole bunch of crap that is complete BS. So it makes it hard to share. So I was glad to see that article didn't have that. That was rare.
It was crazy on the shit that that pops up on Opera's screen about like what you might want to search for. It had a thing for booking.com. I'm just noticing this like right fucking now. I had a thing for booking.com, and I've never spoken those words. I put that website in a protected encrypted signal text.
Wow.
Because one of our Action for Assange co-hosts was asking what we use to look for cheap flights. And now it's on my fucking supposedly encrypted Opera screen.
Wow.
Thanks, Kevin. Kevin is the name that we gave the NSA agent tasked to monitor the group chats for the Free Assange vigils, but we think Kevin has friends that hang out to exist to make our lives more complicated.
That would not surprise me, given the amount of pushback that anybody who supports Assange or talks about WikiLeaks get. That doesn't shock me at all, unfortunately. Yeah.
People in the chat, please let me know if you can hear Elizabeth over the rain, and if not, I will turn her up some. But let's go. This is out of the World Socialist website. I think reprinted the article.
They're awesome. They do really well keeping up with this. this story.
We've had one of the U.S. editors for World Socialist website on the Free Assange Vigils a couple of times. He's a real good guy. Oh, this is from July 2018. I'll have to go dig for that other article. Crazy. But it's talking a lot about the Ecuadorian embassy right before they blocked all of the communications, and that can get us right over to, come on, where's the fucking camera? Oh, because I'm on share screen. I'm sorry, man. I
No problem.
I can get us over
understand.
to the testimony that we found out Julian was actually able to give just a few days ago against UC Global, the Spanish security firm that was selling all of the live feeds that they had, including a live feed in the women's bathroom of the Ecuadorian embassy. Now, aside from like mass privacy violation and no one should be filming in a fucking bathroom in the first place, all pretext of lawyer-client confidentiality has been removed from this case. There's nothing legal about the detention, the arrest, even him being persecuted while in the embassy. Like, none of this shit is quote-unquote legal, and I think it's important to point that out, because when you're dealing with a world government, when you're dealing with intelligence services, the rule of law gets tossed out the fucking window until they need it to use against you.
Very true. Very true. I think that's a great point. I think that it's almost difficult to talk about the Assange situation and the Assange case because there are so many different violations like that over time, over the years that he was in the embassy, and even before. I mean, you know, it's mind-boggling, the amount of illegal persecution. I think that's why, you know, one of the reasons that Nils Meltzer's discussion of Assange is so helpful, because he has an authoritative voice for one thing, but also he does a really good job just putting all of the state-sponsored persecution of Assange in one spot. But before Nils Meltzer's, you know, reports came out, I think that, you know, it was very difficult to even really discuss Assange's case because it would take 3 hours to kind of catch people up on the news they either had never heard or had been reported incorrectly on it. So
well, that's what made Unity for Jay so important when it happened, and that's what made the Decipher You series that you did with Susie incredibly important too, because you're taking complicated, heavy shit and disseminating it in a fashion that lay people can understand. And I was incredibly appreciative of both of those series, and very appreciative of Nils Melzer, especially in the last 6 months, because he hasn't relented at all. He's more vocal and more adamant as this gets closer to February, where we just learned a couple of days ago that Judge Vanessa Barrister, or whatever her name is, finally conceded that this may be a complex matter. This whole let's imprison and torture a man for the better part of a decade so that we can crush actual journalism. Turns out it's a little bit more complex than we thought. And while I'm pulling that up, if you kind of want to give your 2 cents on that.
Yeah, well, I think that's fantastic news in a story that is, you know, filled with the complete opposite most of the time. I don't know what, you know, obviously we'll have to wait and see how that really, you know, pans out. When my cynical way of looking at it also is I wonder what this means about what the U.S. is planning to do. You know, I mean, I never know whether it's something that is actually genuinely positive or if it's just another sleight of hand. But I hope the best, and I think that it's just really, you know, it's unfortunate that that Labour didn't win in the UK election, because I think that would have been the first real glimmer of hope in the Assange case for a very long time if Corbyn had come out on top. Unfortunately, I think that the whole Brexit situation really, you know, kind of bombed his chances. But it's just I think it's just very disheartening, the entire case at the moment, and I'm glad to hear there was some small amount of potentially good news like that.
We flat out don't have enough of it, so
Yeah.
anything that that we can consider good news is going to be good news. It's a tough road that we've chosen to walk here in terms of who's telling the truth about Julian Assange.
Right.
And really, there's not fucking enough of us, Elizabeth. There's not. It's like you and Susie, when you did came together to create Unity for Jay, and the people that participated in that, and then out of that, we started doing the Free Assange vigils when you guys left off. You've done, and have interviewed and have brought to light some incredible moments through CN Live. Very appreciative of that show. Is that going to return? Or are you going to keep? Yeah,
it will. Yeah, sometime or probably the early spring, sometime during the spring, it'll come back. And actually, we were mentioning earlier, having had a crazy month or two. Well, after I had family become ill very seriously, then I got sick with a chest infection that was really bad. So I missed out on participating on the CN Live special they did on Kristen Hafrinson's press conference in Australia, which was an incredible segment that Joe and Kathy over at CN Live put out. So yeah, I mean, I'm definitely gonna be excited when CN Live starts back up again. If people haven't seen that, that's a really great special. But yeah, so I managed to be sick and not be able to participate in that, unfortunately.
So there's a couple of nuggets here in this article that are worth discussing. They wouldn't allow media or the public inside the courtroom while he gave testimony against UC Global. From what I understand, his testimony was pretty limited. Like, no, I didn't know they were selling my information to the CIA.
Right.
There's a brutal quote, and I think I took a screenshot of it. Yeah, David Morales, the owner of UC Global, the man who's already been sentenced to prison over this, in an internal email, company-wide email, said, we're going to sell everything from the hotel, meaning the embassy, to the American customer, which, of course, is the CIA. That's the everything in this, again, includes meetings with his lawyers in the goddamn women's bathroom. It means collecting information on anyone who came to see Julian Assange and then submitting them for surveillance. I kind of shudder to think about the ever-increasing file on people like Pamela Anderson, who came to go see this man out of purely humanitarian reasons. Hey, you're basically incarcerated inside one fucking building. If you step foot out, they're going to drag you to prison on bogus charges. I would like to help raise awareness about this. And now you've got, the full breadth of U.S. surveillance on you as a non-American citizen.
Yeah, no, it's horrendous. Again, it gets to a point where there's so much horrendous, illegal persecution of Assange that it becomes difficult to even, phrase it, to like encapsulate it in words, because it's such a long history of abuse and it's such extensive abuse, and nothing happens. Nobody in the media calls it out. Nobody prosecutes the abuse. It's the prosecutors who are doing it's so extensive that it really does boggle the mind. I mean, it's extreme.
Do you think that's why it's hard to communicate to like normal everyday people who are isolated from this kind of information, that it's so far outside of the scope of normal reality, or it's so fucking cartoonish, or J.J. Abrams' spy movie ridiculous? Like I don't. I'm just spitballing here. Like I don't.
Yeah,
know.
no, I completely think so. I definitely think that's one of the reasons it's difficult to talk to people about it if they haven't followed it at all, because there's so much history to talk about, but there's also stuff that, you know, if you, unless you have an article on a phone right there in your hand to say, oh look, here's where this lie, here's the story the Guardian completely made up about Manafort visiting Assange, or here's the, you know, unless you have those like facts to really show people in person, describing it to them is going to make them basically go, well, what do you mean this illegal stuff happened? Like, well, specifically what? And so it gets very difficult to like actually convince people that the government of multiple different Western countries that are supposed to be liberal and democratic and open and supportive of free press would actually do this. And I think that, you know, one of the best ways to kind of give people some context and some background that makes it more digestible is to talk about previous decades of persecution of truth tellers by intelligence agencies, especially in the United States. You know, whether that's the FBI targeting of Martin Luther King or a number of other, you know, really, really horrendous abuses of power by the CIA and other intelligence agencies over the last few decades. If you can give people that context that they can kind of hold on to, then I think that it's easier to then discuss Assange and the recent, you know, attacks on him.
I've found that there's still people that don't think that COINTELPRO was a real thing, or like was just something that like only happened to Martin Luther King Jr. and that was
right.
it. And let's put this into a little bit of context. J. Edgar Hoover started his career towards the end of World War I. Like, he was already an established DC bureaucrat before they handed him the FBI, and he made his bones on surveilling people and getting the wrong people thrown out of the country. I just found this out the other day. J. Edgar Hoover was instrumental in the deportation of Emma Goldman.
Wow.
And if you guys are listening and you know you're scratching your head as to who Emma Goldman is, she's one of my personal heroes. But she was, I believe, a Czech-born anarchist who came to the U.S., was brought up here, and was instrumental in workers' movements throughout the country. She is the one who coined the phrase, if voting changed anything, they'd make it illegal. That's almost 100-year-old sentence, and it's more true now than it has been at any point in my life as far as I'm concerned. I don't know how rigged the elections were when I was a kid in the 80s, but I can see how they've progressed with voting machines, with hackable software, with parties that are in it for the protection of their consultants and their pocketbooks, and the idea that we have a democratic system or a system where every vote counts is one of those bits of nostalgia that needs to get burned and buried as far as I'm concerned. Or we need to have an actual genuine people-led movement that demands agency that we were told that we already had. Right.
No, completely. I think that quote is amazing. Very, very, very far-sighted quote. Very true. And I think that it's a problem because basically, you know, you have the Western countries, and then you have other countries like, for example, like China. Ed Snowden tweeted out that video yesterday of, I believe, somebody in mainland China being, you know, basically interrogated horrendously by the police. And so we look at that and we think, oh, well, we're so much better off. But the problem is that our governments also fear us. They just do that sort of attack on our free speech in a much more deceitful way. So I think that looking at that and saying, oh, well, we're in such a better situation, in some senses is true, but it doesn't negate the basically, you know, mental terrorism of Western propaganda. So
the chair that they have this guy in that video looks like a ride at the amusement park, where it's just a metal loop like protecting his waist and chest, and then around a little bit further out, and he's cuffed right to a table. Or right to the chair.
Out of a movie. It looks like something, and I almost wondered, like, I tried to look up the source of this video. I mean, I can't, you know, we can't say for certain where it came from, how it was leaked, Is it staged? I don't know. But I can say that that's a really good depiction of how much governments fear their own people. When you put somebody in that level of restraint, that means you fear them. You know, that guy was some random person, it appears, that made a comment on social media. That's how much that government fears a comment on social media. They treat him like a monster who's going to destroy them unless he's literally cuffed to a table. I mean, it's really, really indicative of literally how much free speech, or not free speech, but speech in general, scares government.
I'm listening to you. I'm just getting thrown off by the fucking torrential downpour I'm sitting through. Fuck. No, they had everything but the Hannibal Lecter face mask on that guy.
Right. Exactly.
For posting a comment on a social media group. Like, it's insane. If you're watching right now, pull up your Twitter feed, search up Ed Snowden's Twitter account, scroll down a little bit. I'm sure there's like millions of retweets on it. And it is. There's I didn't have time to check and verify the source. I don't know if it's staged or not either. But if it's staged, and it's staged by, you know, the actual police force to let you know what happens if you don't stay in line or if you speak outside of the narrative, that's some scary shit, because we're next. We're there. We're already living it. They already tried to hem up Max Blumenthal and charge him for some ridiculous shit that he didn't do, for no other reason than that Max reports outside of the narrative. And he's someone whose brain I'd like to pick a little bit, if I ever got the chance to. But I mean, we are headed there. If Jason Burmis talks about this a lot, if you don't think that we already have a social credit scoring system in the U.S., you're fucking fooling yourself. Like, I don't know how many people I've spoken to over the last 5 years that have had to delete everything they've ever said on social media before they went to go apply for a certain job, or start a sock puppet account or backup account that is actually who they are in real life, just so they can, you know, navigate the financial system in this country. That's a social credit scoring system. It is.
Absolutely. No question. And if you so much as retweet somebody who is considered unacceptable in some way, then you're completely smeared by whatever labels are used on that other person or group or, you know, outlet, whatever it may be. So yeah, I completely agree. You know, I mean, like very early, I think Caitlin Johnstone's, you know, tenure on Twitter and on Medium, you know, people came after her for simply retweeting somebody who's, you know, who I despise myself, but to try to literally destroy her voice because of a retweet, I think is, you know, that's an example of that attempt to shut down speech. Again, I think it all comes down to, if you're trying to shut down speech, you're afraid of what that person has to say. And
Absolutely.
I think that, you know.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with that more. And in Caitlin Johnstone's case, like, I know people get their feathers ruffled about her. I know they do. I know that, like, her name is a trigger for a lot of people.
Which I don't understand. Why is that? I really love what she has to say. I love her writing. So what is so triggering about her writing? I mean, I don't get it.
Let's talk about this for a second, because I feel like this is a good conversation to have. The simple fact that she, like, didn't even nod in the direction of a despicable person, but RT'd them because they were making a valid point.
Yeah, right.
People you don't like are going to have valid points. You hold them up as an example to say, even this fucking shit stain figured it out.
Exactly.
If this piece of shit figured it out, why haven't the rest of you? And we're so conditioned to pick a side, Elizabeth, to have a team to root for, that if someone comes up and says, look, even this idiot is getting it right, your team mentality makes you go, oh, well, you must like that person, and that person must be influencing every single thing that you think, read, or type, so you're anathema to me now, you've got to go.
Well, and I think part of that too, in addition to the like tribalism mentality, I think there's also I think we're also so conditioned to follow cults of personality. And I think we've talked about this before, and I've been here before. But basically, whether it's celebrities, whether it's politicians, it's like we're all kind of indoctrinated that if you agree with somebody, you must be almost like a cult follower of them. So, for example, like when people ask me, like, "Well, do you support Tulsi or do you support Bernie or whatever?" I'm like, well, I don't, since 2016 especially, I don't follow any cult of personality. What I do support are the actions that I think are really great. So like when Tulsi calls out Hillary Clinton in the DNC, I'm 100,000% there for her. That doesn't mean that I'm going to walk around being a cult member of her or anyone else, because that's, I think, the problem. Even though I think Tulsi's a great candidate, all of that, but we get into major problems when we walk around assuming that this personality that we believe in is going to change things for us. So, but to bring it back to the point about Caitlin Johnstone, that's what people do. They confuse simply supporting or saying, oh, this is one valid position. They confuse that with joining that person's personality cult. And I think that's a huge problem.
And those people are sitting there wearing a T-shirt with somebody else's name on it. Right. I've had a lot of jobs throughout the years where somebody else's name is on the back of my shirt, and I have to be a walking advertisement for them because they're signing my checks. With politics, you put somebody else's name on the back of your shirt while giving them your checks, and then, I've said this for a long time now, it still rings true. The pathway to neoliberalism starts with picking your favorite candidate in the Democratic primary and spending the next however long defending their shitty words and shitty actions and shitty choices. And then the next thing you know, you're being like, oh, well, holding a fundraiser in a wine cave isn't that bad, I see the same shit with these fucking quote-unquote progressives with this team mentality that it always leads to bring it back around to what we were talking about a minute ago, shutting down speech.
Right.
You can't be quote-unquote progressive and demand the silencing of speech on the level that most of these people are running around doing. It's insane to me.
Absolutely. I think that it brings you to a point of feeling like you're almost nihilistic, to look at the fact that no matter what happens in this primary, meaning no matter what the public thinks, wants, votes for, that there is going to be the kind of corruption that will see a neoliberal take the nomination. And I think that brings me to something I'd wanted to say before we started the kind of broadcast, which was that it's really an end of a cycle right now. I think a lot of the things that we saw in 2016, like the fact that we were able to see behind the curtain, thanks to WikiLeaks, of the DNC process, has almost been forgotten, even by progressives who now support Bernie. And I think that there is a 99% chance that we will not see the equivalent of that. 2016 was this really unique window into the reality of our political machine. And I think whether it's the Bex and the DNC fraud lawsuit, and the fact that both of them are now suspended from Twitter. I think they've voluntarily kind of gone off Facebook and that kind of thing. Whether it's, basically it's kind of like a lot of the real movement for change that was sparked by 2016 has kind of gone under the radar to the point that it's forgotten by too many people. And I think that also then plays into, like you say, like people putting all this energy in and kind of just either wanting to shut down speech or just wanting to put the blinders on and say, well, that doesn't matter. 2020 is different than 2016. And it hurts me to see that intentional, voluntary path of ignorance kind of opening up for so many people.
Voluntary path of ignorance. That's a fucking beautiful way of putting it. I have been dragged throughout the tweetosphere for undermining Bernard Jesus Sanders by pointing out that he won't say Julian Assange's name out loud, that he spent 4 years doing fuck all to get election integrity as a front and center issue.
I don't think he's even mentioned the issue other than to shill the Russiagate line.
Yeah, and not only that,
yeah.
but he's doing the exact same thing Obama did, where it's like, oh, the past is the past, and we don't need to worry about that now. We're here in this moment. Let's focus on this moment, motherfucker. You can't do that if you're not taking the lessons learned with you, you know. And when I talk to people inside the campaign or people who are volunteers in the campaign, they're like, oh, well, he's got lawyers, so it's cool.
Yeah.
That's the eye roll and the head back that you just did at that line. Yeah. That's my response every single time. And they're like, but the lawyers, look, we're watching in real time right now. Julian Assange's legal team look like fucking Muppets compared to the scope that, the UK court system has, the US court system has. You can have good lawyers, Jared Beck and Elizabeth Beck, good lawyers. And I don't mean, like, I don't even know what their style of litigation is. When I say good lawyers, I mean people who are on the right side of the issue, who are arguing for, genuine retribution in their case, or in Julian's case. It doesn't matter how good your lawyers are if there isn't a fundamental change at the most base level of the way the system operates. It's designed to fuck you in an uncomfortable way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that basically it seems to me, and this is one of the most disappointing takeaways I have moving towards 2020. It's, so close now, just a couple of weeks from the new year. But basically the fact that it feels like in a bunch of different areas, it feels like it's just business as usual. It's like all of that kind of almost, and I don't want to, like use woo-woo language, but basically this mass awakening that happened, because I hate the word awakening now has been taken over by the QAnon cult, so I hate using that word. But basically the mass awakening that happened in 2016 was real. I think that so many people on the left and the right were outraged for good reason about what happened there, whether it was the DNC cheating Sanders or whether it was the media's colluding with the DNC to like make Trump a Pied Piper, or to just simply work with the Hillary campaign to do everything they could to get her elected, and then ridiculously misreporting on her chances of winning. I mean, on and on and on. There were so many different things that really woke the public up about not only how rigged the election system is, but how rigged the media reporting on that system is. All of these different factors came together in a way that is completely unique in my mind in recent history. And it really bothers me to see everything kind of simmering down to business as usual, unfortunately.
And it is that the response to 2016, the one that I advocated for, was mass demonstrations, both like staying home and not participating in the system, to gathering en masse and demanding some goddamn agency. And what happened was a couple of independent content creators still put out decent material that were around back then, and then everybody else kind of went, okay, if we're gonna survive, we need to tone down our content. We need to make advertiser-friendly material. We need to have clickbaity titles. We need to only cover what's going on from mainstream media's framing. And even if that's pointing your finger at mainstream media and going, that's factually incorrect, like, you're still using all of what the mainstream says and does as the baseline material for your content. And this show kind of arose as a retaliation to that. Like, in addition to having you on multiple times, like, I have you on because of what you write in Consortium News, because it's a truly independent outlet, because you're not influenced by what takes place in the main, or you're not reacting to what takes place in the mainstream. You're out there doing the work yourself, collecting the information, and then presenting it in spite of what the mainstream is doing. It's the same reason that I have Whitney Webb on. It's the same reason I bring Jared Beck on the show. Like, it's, you
Right.
know.
And that was a great interview. I liked seeing the Becks have a platform again.
Oh, man, I can talk to that guy endlessly. And I still don't understand why you get so much hate. I still don't. Like, that's a fucking giant head scratcher for me, especially when you get him on camera and you're having a normal course of conversation. But I think that he upset the feels of Team Bernie so bad because he dared to utter uncomfortable truths that they had to ostracize him. And if that's how you deal as a progressive movement with information that you don't want to hear, your movement is doomed to fucking fail.
Well, and also, I mean, in addition to being banned from Twitter, it's like permanently suspended. I mean, what Jared Beck was rightfully pointing out was often, in addition to other, takes on history, whether, he would talk about a lot of different subjects. But one of the things that was, I think, as you say, hurt the feels, kind of triggered a lot of people amongst the Bernie campaign, or camp, I should say, is just that he would openly just say really simple things like Bernie never supported the DNC fraud lawsuit. Bernie, he never talked about this election rigging that happened, that was proven by WikiLeaks, but then was further proved by this DNC fraud lawsuit. Never recognized it. So just very simple statements like that, I think, are one of the reasons that, it's really, really a huge detriment to the political discourse that he and Elizabeth have both been suspended from Twitter. It's ridiculous.
No, I agree, and he did. He voluntarily shut down his Facebook. I was actually in the process of messaging and scheduling with him when he was shutting down his Facebook, and I got a weird late night message like, "This will be the last communication that I have from the," all right, fucking, I get it. I don't necessarily get going to Gab to make that your chosen platform. That seems to be more of a Nazi-filled echo chamber to me. But I haven't spent a lot of time on it. I haven't really got to know it as a website. I haven't done that with Mastodon or Minds or any of that shit either. And I know I should be looking for different avenues of I guess shameless self-promotion for this show. I don't really have a social media account to take pictures of my food or talk about my kids and shit.
No, I mean, I don't use social media for that either anymore, especially now. But I think that I use Minds, MeWe, Gab. I basically, whenever I write an article or I do something that I put on Twitter, I just also put it on those websites. I just copy paste the same thing over, because for you're reaching a different group, sometimes the same, but sometimes people that don't have the Twitter accounts and the Facebook accounts. But also because I expect at some point, whether it's now or later, to be suspended from Twitter and Facebook and those things. So I want to have that information that I've been tweeting and posting on Facebook, etc., also in multiple different places. So I think it's really intelligent, whether you're a creator or whether you're a consumer of independent media, to be on multiple websites. And that doesn't mean you have to never go onto Twitter or Facebook again. It just means that you don't have everything in one place.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I haven't really shot myself in the dick on that yet, but I'm amazed that this YouTube channel is still up and running. I really am. I'm not commercially viable.
I know, isn't that that is the most ridiculous? And I think that this whole thing with YouTube, whether it's their their issue with advertising to children, or whether it's that change about, well, we can just delete you for not being commercially viable, all of that feels to me like such business as usual. It's like the plutocracy just marching on. And I don't know if it's this sense that nobody's really responding to it because, for example, Assange is in prison and he can't speak out about it. I don't know what that is, but it really seems to me that everybody's just kind of nodding their head and just walking forward like it doesn't matter. And I think that's really disappointing. I'm not saying everybody, but it's in general, that's the sense that I get.
Yeah, my natural reaction to that was, okay, let me see, how many hard-hitting fucking truth tellers I can get on this show until they shut me down.
Right.
Like,
Of
that
course.
I include you in that. That's why I had Jared back on the show. That's why Sam Tripoli was here. I've got Whitney Webb scheduled for early January. Like, we're, if I'm going to lose this platform, it's going to be because I'm not towing the fucking line. Like, I've
Right.
had an adverse reaction to authority my entire life. And in another, I guess 1,000 years ago or something, like, the government in charge would have made sure that me and everyone like me was dead and couldn't breed, so that there would be, pacified citizens along the way. And instead of outright murder, which we are doing in some cases, Julian Assange is a great example of that, we take away people's ability to make a living off of what they're doing. We ostracize them. We have enforced such a team mentality that Caitlin Johnstone triggers people. Like, it's the subtle psychological manipulation
Right.
that we're exposed to every single day is, I think, something that people need to be aware of and aren't, because they're so fucking caught up in it.
Very true.
Um,
And I think Caitlin. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, please.
I was just going to add that I think that Caitlin. Speaking of Caitlin, she wrote a fantastic piece very recently that said basically, I think the title was something like "The Price of Sanity is Alienation," and in this culture, and I think that's completely true. And I think that it's really like, and in my own personal life, when I am talking to people who in other areas are completely like deep thinkers, well educated, really intelligent, and then they tell me about Russian disinformation and how, they're posting Snopes in response to people's it's like, it's really shocking and gut-wrenching to see how well the propaganda in this country works. And I guess that's been the case for a very long time. But I get, for me at least, it's just more and more jarring to see that in effect and to see so many people brainwashed by it.
I'm gonna get swept away out here. There's a guy in this town who I respect a lot on a lot of different levels, and he's a martial arts instructor and very grounded individual, very recognizes shit most of the time when he smells it, and has just dove so far into Trump derangement syndrome that, like, it's almost impossible to talk to him.
Yeah, exactly. And I hate that. I really hate that.
I ran into him at the grocery store, and he wanted to accost me for something I put on Facebook, which was, like, basically pointing out, like, the same week that the Democrats impeached Trump, they voted to give him $131 billion more than what he asked for in the military budget. They gave him everything he wanted in the 2020 NDAA, which includes getting into a rare earth mineral race with China.
Right.
Mining for rare earth minerals is more destructive than fucking mountaintop removal mining. And that it was, the whole impeachment thing was theater. And he sees me in the grocery store and he's like, so you're a Trump supporter now?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's the other thing too. So basically, a lot of that, one of the ways that propaganda has worked so well is to basically eradicate and erase any sense that there are left-wing or progressive people who are critical of Russiagate and critical of basically the Democratic Party establishment. So, the only way that people can deal with us when we poke our head above the fence is to say you must not be a progressive, you must be a a Trump supporter. And so it's really disappointing. It's just literally downright depressing. But I think also, one of the reasons that this has been such a, that propaganda is so important, and I think Caitlin, again, she does a great job writing about this too, but basically, we don't have the situation like you have in China or in previous centuries where if you said something wrong, the Inquisition was going to come and torture you. And because we also at the same time have a literate society that didn't exist hundreds of years ago, because of the fact that we're supposed to be able to think, read, and speak freely, the word has had, like words in general, whatever you read, whatever you take in, has been so weaponized to keep us under control. Because, in centuries gone by, when you didn't have a literate society, you didn't have to worry about what they were saying to each other. You could do anything, and it was fun. So basically the ruling classes had to change its tactics over time to keep us under control without overtly showing their hand of keeping us under control, like you see in China or other places.
That's a fascinating point. It makes me think about the half century or more outright war on education that we've had in this country. There was a guy who used to do like morning news and commentary 4 or 5 days a week on the radio out here. There's an independent radio station, or it was independent. I think they got bought out by a Clear Channel, called K-Pig, out of Freedom, California. And the guy who came on was called Travis T. Hip. And he would talk about, he went to Berkeley in the 50s, graduated in like 1960, went there from his GI Bill. He did a few years in the Navy. And he was like, that whole era, the 1950s, 1955 to 1965, produced people who had done just what he did, went to college after they spent some time in the military, and were genuinely educated by people who wanted them to be critical thinkers and active in their communities. And he said after our graduating class took to the streets, they made sure that no one would ever get that kind of smart ever again. You're allowed to be smart. You're allowed to be smart in your specific area of study, like you were just saying, where someone's, a very deep thinker, very intelligent, very well educated, but will tote that Russiagate line. You remove everything from history about COINTELPRO, about how the FBI has... Nobody knows that hardly anybody knows about the move bombing in Philadelphia in the 80s, where they literally dropped incendiary bombs on a Philadelphia neighborhood. They don't know about Black Wall Street and the razing of Tulsa, Oklahoma. The way that you teach your populace is 100% intentional, and that's what makes the internet dangerous. That's what makes consortium news dangerous. It's what makes Slow News Day dangerous. We're going straight to the documents, we're going straight to primary source material, and we're not putting the spin on it that says ignore everything that is glaringly obviously wrong about this.
Absolutely. No, completely. And I think that, it's really, I think it shows the efficiency of that propaganda mechanism in education, that people will be, like you said, so educated and yet so able to toe that line. I think, the other part of that is that you have, like you said, you have history being kind of deleted from the record, but you also have this basic, and I think, you mentioned this earlier as far as economics. It's not only that you have to, that you're propagandized not to think critically, but also, that even if you do think critically, you can't say anything out loud about it, because then you won't get hired. If you're in academia, you won't get tenure or whatever. So it's a multifaceted system of mental enslavement that just, if you're not literally drinking the Kool-Aid, then you're going to at least pretend you're drinking the Kool-Aid. It's horrendous. And I do think that the internet has freed up a lot of, actual critical thought. Think about just 15, 20 years ago, if, this conversation wouldn't be happening because YouTube and the internet didn't really exist. And the only options you had were a couple of different cable channels. So again, I can totally understand why the internet scares the plutocrats so much. And that's why they've had to then weaponize the internet as much as they can as a new method of propaganda. And unfortunately, I think they're slowly getting better at it. But in the kind of dawn of the internet, you had this generation that was kind of the rulers of the basically the plutocratic class did not have tech skills. They weren't social media smart. There was no kind of like awareness of how to use it as a propaganda mechanism. And I think we're now seeing that come into effect. You're seeing narratives that are disinformation seeded from alternate media and from the quote unquote independent media. You're seeing the co-opting of that, just like you saw COINTEL, in the civil rights movement. I mean, it's the same thing, but they're slowly getting streetwise as to how the internet and social media really works.
I am so glad you brought that up. And you can defer on this, but what do you think of Crystal Ball in terms of alternative media because I think that like she could be a stepping stone to people getting to a much more real and deeper truth. But I think that the way that the show is presented, and you've got like two very attractive people in a very, high class setting, I think that allows for more people to just get stuck there. And be like, "Oh, well, this is the truth." And it is, and I'll just go vote for Bernie and it'll be better.
I think I don't really have anything against her, especially because I feel like her willingness to give up that, talking head position at MSNBC, I think, speaks to a level of integrity that most people in the media don't have. Whether or not it's a positive or negative thing, I would side more on the idea that it is positive because specifically because there are so many people that are totally propagandized, that anyone with any sort of platform that is speaking the truth about for the Democratic Party or speaking the truth about almost anything is kind of a win. And again, I say that basically from the position, again, of not buying into a cult of personality or saying, I always agree with this person, or I 100% validate that their motives are correct and good, but simply that I think that what she talks about, it would have a net positive effect on people. Whether they get stuck there or not, that's, we can't really control that. But I think that basically anything that challenges Maddow is good with me, basically.
I appreciate that take. I guess I'm a bit more cynical. Because I don't I see the level of comfortability that people have got with content creators who 2 years ago were pushing the envelope and dialed it back so hard. Because they chose to make a living this way, and they saw their livelihood being threatened by the truth that they were telling, and instead of getting mad about that, they got comfortable and maybe comfortable is the wrong word, but they acquiesced really when like power shook its fist at them.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I think what you're describing as well is exactly what I was trying to describe when I was talking about it seeming as if things are business as usual now.
Yeah.
It's like that's the sense that I get as well. I don't know whether Crystal Wall is part of that. What I guess I would say is that when I criticize somebody or a narrative like the QAnon stuff, it's not because of whatever anti-establishment stuff they might say. It's when they do toe establishment talking points, like the whole QAnon thing was very, trust sessions, pro intervention in Iran, all this stuff that was very pro deep state, really. So that's the giveaway. That's the problem. And so with Crystal Ball, I don't watch her very often. I haven't seen her push establishment talking points. If I did, I would criticize it. But basically, I think going back to what you said about people getting basically complacent, I completely agree. I think that's an unfortunately really pervasive mentality. It's almost unavoidable though, because of the fact that we don't have an ongoing DNC fraud lawsuit right now. We don't have WikiLeaks publishing DNC information right now, and all of the revelations from that have they've exploded onto the scene. The reverberations happened for a few years, and now there's just this quiet, and everything is kind of like just moving on as if nothing happened. Whether that's an intentional thing people are engaging in, or whether it's unintentional, I almost wonder if it would be if it's kind of unavoidable, but it's a problem nonetheless. So.
Yeah, no, and I thought that at least the OPCW leaks would kind of bring about a resurgence of that, and to a very small degree it has. But you've got, like, when Tucker Carlson is the only example you can hold up, it's like you do it almost like shamefully, like, yeah, well, this guy, you know. But Tariq Haddad being fired from Newsweek for trying to cover it is, again, it's one of those things where all of independent media should be talking about this. All of us should be hounding this guy for an interview.
Right.
We were supposed to have him on the Free Assange Vigil, and there was a miscommunication about the time, and he is going to come on and he's going to talk about it. But, like, we shouldn't be scooping people, per se, you know? Like, it happens one day a week. Like, that it's, and we were very fortunate to have Ray McGovern on the very day that he got subpoenaed. So the first opportunity he had to talk about it was on the show. I about fell backwards in my fucking chair. Like, that him getting subpoenaed means there's a chance that the public will have accurate information about Seth Rich going forward. Or at least that's what it says to me, because the kinds of stuff that he has to talk about, like he can't say Aaron Rich's name in print without getting in trouble.
Exactly. Well, that applies to not only Ray McGovern and people at VIPS, it also applies to me and any other independent journalist who might want to report on the Seth Rich issue, unfortunately. And I'm not attacking Aaron Rich or the Rich family, but I think that it's really sad that we can't even talk about it without risking being litigated against.
No, you've got to say,
not a good place to be.
Like, I think you can get around it by saying a member of Seth Rich's family. But the way it looks to me is that somebody got to Aaron Rich. What the fuck keeps happening with my camera?
I don't know. We talked about Seth Rich, and then your camera went out. That's hilarious. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. That's a joke. But
God damn you, Kevin.
Yeah.
But no, it seems like someone got to Seth Rich's brother and said, "Look, I don't, we'll help you make this go away, and we'll make sure that you don't get named as Seth Rich's accomplice in this if you help smear everyone trying to get the truth out about your brother's murder." And he went, okay.
I think, and I can't speculate on whether that's true or not, but what I do think is that I think that there is a strong pattern of people involved in that story, and not just Seth Rich's family. A lot of people that have, like whether it's Cy Hirsch, Ellen Ratner, a lot of different people have said one thing very, very clearly, only to then change their narrative later. And I think that in itself, the fact that they changed their own narrative, and when they changed it, that it could factually be shown to be a false change. Like, for example, Cy Hirsch initially said, oh, that wasn't me. And then he basically went against what he had said in this tape that Ed Petoskey put out. And then also with Ellen Ratner, you have her basically telling Michael Isikoff on Conspiracy Land on Conspiracy Land's series about how the Seth Rich story was a Russian intelligence narrative. God, don't even get me started on that. But basically, Ellen Ratner came onto his show and said, "No, I didn't say this. I didn't, that's not how it happened. I didn't tell Ed Butowski that." But then you have the video of her in 2016, a few days after she was, at the embassy with Assange, openly saying, she doesn't mention Seth Rich by name, but she definitely says it, that Assange had said it was not the Russians, et cetera, et cetera. So when there's that kind of evidence, when you had the Ed Butowski tape with Cy Hirsch, when you have the video of Ellen Ratner in public stating this, why would they change their story even though there's that kind of evidence on the public record? That's, I think, so the fact that they changed their story in that kind of really obviously false way, I think is almost more indicative of the kind of pressure being put on people around the story than the actual information that they changed in the first place. I think that's one of the things that I think you can take away. In a similar way that the persecution of WikiLeaks and Assange says almost as much as the documents they publish. So I think recognizing that type of, I guess, not censorship, but
It's
untouchability.
self-censorship.
Yeah, untouchability of that story, I think, is as much evidence as anything in the story itself. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. That's worth it exploring a little bit, because you know that it's not just Seth Rich. I mean, it bears out with the OPCW reports when they're firing people over trying to get this information out. And Caitlin Johnstone is the unofficial fucking subject of the show today, apparently. But, yeah. But she's one of the few people that talks about narrative control and narrative management regularly in a way that I think people can understand. And if they weren't so predisposed to hating her because she said something fucking accurate about a right-winger once, like, they would absorb that information a little bit better. I think QAnon uses the word, like, co-opted the word awakening mostly because they're like, you know, guys in their 40s that just took mushrooms for the first time or something like that. Like, but not to make it too woo, but you're right though. There is this sort of like general understanding that we are truly well fucked and far from home when it comes to having a representative government, when it comes to having an economic system that works for us. And if you look at the rest of the world, they're up in arms over it. They're in the streets over it. There are protests going on in over 40 countries right now, with zero coverage. In the U.S. media, I would imagine that there isn't a lot of coverage in the U.K. or Australia, other than maybe to like point a finger at the protesters. But I mean, this shit really has come to a boiling point, and there's only one of two ways that can go. You know, either we get our agency or we get so thoroughly crushed that nobody dares it again for another generation or two. And in the 60s,
I agree.
Nobody dared. After they crushed the fucking hippies and crushed the anti-war movement and, you know, made sure that...
Assassinated all of its leaders, yeah.
Yeah. You know, that was a sign saying, if you come at us, this is what happens to you. The slow motion crucifixion of Julian Assange, as Chris Hedges so eloquently puts it, is one of those things. And I think that our response to it, especially as we come closer to the February 24th hearing date, cold weather be damned, like, it has to be massive if we're going to have any kind of a chance going forward to have access to accurate information that the government doesn't want us to see.
Definitely. And I think that one of the things too that you know, kind of came up for me while you were saying that is that it's not just like like one of the things that we look at is, oh yeah, the CIA, for example, not only interfered in, well, let me walk this back a moment. Basically, you look at the leaders of protest and civil rights movements, peace movements, you know, sitting presidents assassinated. And then you look at the length of time that the CIA had even been in existence at that time. It was a very short period of time between the creation of CIA and a lot of these things happening. My point there being that that moment that the CIA was created, I think, was really the turning point for our democracy as a functioning democracy. After that point, you had the collusion of the intelligence agencies with the media. You have, you know, and this isn't something that only happened, you know, in 2016 in the Bernie and Hillary face-off where you had the Clinton campaign working with CNN. This is something that's gone on for decades. And I think that, you know, basically our response to all of this has to be aware of how deeply that changed everything. Sorry to kind of go off on a tangent, but basically I think that that's one of, and talking about that history is one of the only ways that I think people who have swallowed propaganda on things like Assange are going to be able to actually hear, because they've been so propagandized on Russiagate. You know, Assange is a Russian asset. Matt Au told me so. Like, I've had people say to me who are really, like, again, well-educated, intelligent, empathetic, good people say, oh my goodness, I am just scared for Rachel Maddow. I pray for her. Like, I'm serious, and I'm not joking. So what I'm saying is, I don't think those people can be reached on Russiagate or Assange. But I think if you talk about the 1960s civil rights movement and COINTELPRO and those types of situations, I think maybe there's more of a possibility they could hear that, because it's not like they don't have their emotions tied up in it like they do with Russiagate and the Trump derangement syndrome and all of that.
I hope you're right. I do. I think that that when you, or at least when I've tried to talk to people in my own family and in my own community who are of an age to remember that shit, their knee jerk is to go, well, that was a different FBI.
Right.
You know? And then, so you have to, like, sit with them and play them clips of current FBI directors, recent former FBI directors, just blatantly lying their ass off on camera with demonstrably provable falsehoods. Jim Comey's interview with Chris Wallace the other week is a prime example of that. And the only reason I watched a little bit of it is because I knew we were having Ray McGovern on the Free Assange Vigil, and I knew that, and I know that he, like, consumes that kind of media just to fucking pick it apart, because, you know, he's a badass skinny Santa with his Julian Assange beard, and he gets to do whatever the fuck he wants because he's Ray McGovern. But man, if you can stand 5 minutes of it, if you haven't seen it, watch like 5 minutes of that interview with Comey and Chris Wallace, because Comey is just so confident, all on his face, that the bullshit that he's slinging is going to just be swallowed. And Chris Wallace, to his credit, a couple of times is like, you know, that didn't happen.
Well, and again, you know, what that brings us back to again is the fact that it is so difficult when talking to people, you know, whether it's in your family, whether it's in your community or friends, whatever. It's so difficult to say, oh, well, the media lies, or, you know, like the politicians are lying, because you can't just give them a general statement like that. You do have to, because they will rightfully say, well, show me where, you know, so you have to have specific, concrete, factual examples. You can't just say generalities like that. But it forces any sort of like citizen who has critical thinking that hasn't been completely disengaged to become teachers and journalists in their own right. They're having to basically take that role in order to just have a conversation with their family, friends, loved ones, whoever. And I think that's a huge burden to put on a class of people that are already debt slaves, that are already trying to just survive. And I think that's the thing. I mean, that's one of the things that's really different about the 50s and 60s, at least for kind of white America. You could have a family income that came from one person. There was more of the ability to go out and actually protest. Whereas now I think that the vast, vast majority of people do not have the time, energy, mental energy to take this stuff in and really pick it apart and think about it. And that's not an accident, you know? So I think that it's a really hard situation to be in, to have critical thinking, to be aware of this actual history, and to try and have conversations with people about it when you're already facing everything that we all go through on a day-to-day basis.
No, you're absolutely right, and that kind of ties into the war on education that we've lived through, right? Because college was affordable, because getting an education was something that didn't have to put you into debt slavery. Fucking Harvard was like $4,000 a year in 1972. It was cheaper than that, or basically, you know, universities, California state universities were basically free. Like, you could go and work for a summer and pay for a year of college. And now
isn't that unbelievable now to think, look at that now, and how much things have changed in just a few decades? That's incredible when you think about just that one fact alone. And I think it was interesting, like you'd mentioned, like how it's embarrassing to retweet or amplify like Tucker Carlson when he gets it right. Well, for me, yesterday, I saw Jack Dorsey of all people on Twitter tweet a link about Bitcoin and the fact that cryptocurrency will be one of the potential, ways of dealing with income inequality. I'm a really big fan of that. I think that's great. So I grudgingly retweeted it, but I'm just saying that, there are only a very few little glimmers of hope. I think cryptocurrency is one of them when it comes to this entire fiat bubble that we've been in since we got taken off the gold standard. I'm not an economist. That's just what I think.
Yeah.
But, I think there are a few tiny glimmers of hope like that. But otherwise, I mean, the mass public is under a huge amount of stress. And yeah, I think that becomes a huge blocking point, not only to the public listening to individual kind of citizen journalists, but also for those citizen journalists trying to even have the mental energy to address this with people. I mean, it's definitely a two-way street with that.
No, it is, and I've been kind of a victim of that over the last couple of months, because I have a day job. I have 3 kids I gotta fucking feed and shit, and I live in a very expensive part of the country, and the goddamn milk is $6 a gallon. Like, it sucks,
Yeah.
It's one of those places that, like, once you get there, it's impossible to leave because you can't afford it. Moving costs a lot of money. And then finding a job and a delay, all that shit, so I go and I do my work, and I, build stuff and fix stuff, and that's what I do, but it takes a lot out of my body. I've been walking around on a broken leg for almost 14 years, and was told by a bunch of different doctors that I'd never walk. I fell 18 feet off the roof and landed on the concrete, and it, like, literally blew my ankle out of my leg.
Wow.
I have a nylon ball where my ankle used to be. But I was told by a bunch of different doctors I'd never walk, let alone work again. And when they give you a settlement check for that, in my case, I didn't have a fancy lawyer. My entire life was worth like 40 grand to them. And just paying rent in California for a year eats that up, So you gotta do something. But if I could, I'd be making, I'd put out fucking 15 different videos a day. Like, I just don't have a week. I don't have the physical capability of doing that at the end of the day. Like, I'm fucking beat, yo.
Yeah, so many people are. And I think that if anything, that's one way of trying, for me personally, of trying to have compassion for people who are brainwashed. Because I feel like, we're all kind of, even if people are total victims of propaganda, we're all kind of in this together. And I feel like if you can just try to approach people like that with basically saying, hey, I'm not trying to be like on a team here. I'm not like pro-Trump or whatever. I just care about the truth, and start there. That's easier than basically, getting mad back at people for being victims of propaganda, basically.
Yeah, no, and I think, again, like, even in the, like, truth community, or people who do kind of operate outside of the narrative, it's so easy just to snap on somebody.
Right, and completely close down the conversation, yeah.
Yeah, and having that compassion, as cynical as I might be, like, I do try to have it. I try to, like, give people an opportunity or 15, and kind of, like, I would rather reach somebody than close off, that person and their entire circle of communication, because I went off over something that seems obvious to me, Right.
It can be, and it's so easy to do that. It just because there's so much background that you've kind of absorbed from independent media that other people have literally no clue about. And it's so easy to say, well, duh, of course, blah, blah, X, Y, Z. I mean, and it's, people be looking at you like, what? Like, what are you even talking about?
Yeah.
I think one way, I mean, the way that I try to approach it too is I just try to start where people are at. Like, if they're pro-Russiagate, or like a lot of times, because you'll say something and they won't know what you're talking about, so they'll ask a question. So trying to start where they're at and just answering those questions, and even if they throw it out, I mean, at least you've tried in a way that's not just like shutting them down. And that's I think the best we can do. I mean, and it's ridiculously important. I think the two glimmers of hope I have going forward, even though it seems like things have settled down into the status quo much more than even last year. The two glimmers of hope I see are cryptocurrency and that video of the guy in China being, strapped to a table because he dared to post on social media. I take that as a galvanizing statement on the effect and the fear instilled in governments and the plutocrats by social media, by independent thinkers, by people who are simply speaking. So I think if there's anything to take away positively, it's that despite everything, despite how much it seems like everything is just sewn up, tied up, completely is never going to change, I think just the fact that our voice has that impact to instill that fear should encourage us to keep speaking when we can and how we can.
Fuck, that's awesome. I think that's a great note to wrap on too.
Yeah.
Will you please tell the wonderful people where they can find you, and thank you as always for wonderful conversation.
Thank you for having me very much. You can find me on Twitter and Facebook at Elizabeth Leavos. You can also find my work on Steemit. I mean, Consortium News, CN Live, etc., etc. And basically, though, I think that more than anything, I just hope people do keep trying to trudge along and say what they can say, as much truth as they can, as they're capable of sharing with people. And I appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity to come on and speak. Thank you.
Yeah. This has been Sunday's live Slow News Day. We are going to have a free Assange vigil on Christmas. So if you are one of those people, we found that like people that are in the activist community or are typically a little bit more awake than the rest of the world, both just loathe Christmas and tend to be like less surrounded by people at that time of the year. So come hang out with us. We'll definitely be doing a Christmas and New Year's Day vigil. I keep joking that we're gonna start at like 7 o'clock in the morning on New Year's Day, just for all the hungover motherfuckers, but that's not gonna happen. And yeah, thank you for being here with me. Thank you to the chat crew. I love you guys, and good luck to us all.